Hello. Why are you talking in such a weird voice?
Do I sound weird?
I think you're on a 555 line or something.
Hello.
Back in the days before the interwebnet, you had premium rate phone lines that you could call for specific things.
What were they for?
Well, premium rate services.
Premium rate. They're not like sex lines, are they? You don't want to say that out loud. How do you know this?
I was thinking more about the weather or the talking clock. But, you know, if you want to go to sex lines, you can go to sex lines. Welcome back to the Pilote podcast with me, David Fuller, and Cory Smith. This week we talk about the future of banking, Shopify's dirty secrets, and the Web3 word of the week is soulbound. Why the adult industry has been at the absolute forefront of everything digital except for Web3.
Hey, you know what? That's an excellent question. I hadn't actually thought about that. But you're absolutely correct. It has. It was on the forefront of e-commerce, video,
VHS,
like literally everything.
The internet, payment on the internet, paywalls, video on the internet. Every innovation there's ever been in digital has been pushed the bleeding edge of adult content. But for some reason, Web3 and the Metaverse so far haven't offered us an adult offer.
The first company I ever went to work for after I left college, when I worked for the ISP in Miami, went and worked for a startup company. I can't remember the name of it now. It's big, though. And he left the company that I worked for to go work for this payment company. And they were a payment company for porn sites, an e-commerce company. And he's like, this is the future. You should come with me. And they tried to hire me and they offered a lot of money. And I was like, no, that's crazy. I'm not going to go work in porn. I'm going to get a legitimate job and go work in the news business at the Miami Herald. And of course, he went on to make literally millions of dollars and went into and is still in the I'd still talk to him today. He's still in the payment business. He's like some CEO. And he works in the payment industry that's associated with the gaming business in Las Vegas.
Well, that's the other industry that like to push the envelope when it comes to technology. Right. Especially marketing. Digital marketing would be nothing if it wasn't for online gaming.
Right. But I should have listened to him. I didn't listen to him. And then I slogged it out in the legitimate internet for years.
He was the one that told you to buy Bitcoin when it was 10 cents.
Right. Right. Exactly. And I didn't listen. I'll admit it. I was a late adopter on a couple of things. I was a very big resistor to smartphones.
Really?
Yeah, I was late to the game on the iPhone deal in like 2007. I was like resistant to it. I'm like, why?
But America was late to mobile anyway because of various reasons. I mean, I remember when we started doing business together and we were talking about SMS. You were like, what's that?
Yeah, 100%. Like, who cares?
Because you had two-way radio chat or something, which was
we had
an American product. Yeah, exactly.
We had Nextel. Remember the radio phones, and we thought those were super cool.
And you were like, why would anyone use text messaging? It's impossible to type on a keyboard. You've got to spend, 27 clicks to write 7 letters, because remember you had to like spell through each letter.
That's right. That's right. Like C, D, D, E. You're absolutely correct.
This will never catch on. No one's ever going to do this. No one's ever going to send text messages. This is a ridiculous thing.
Then the BlackBerry came out, and we were even back during when I worked for internet startups. One of the internet startups I worked at, we all bought They bought us all Nextel phones. We thought they were so great. And then texting happened and we were like, this is dumb. And then BlackBerries came out and we were like, oh, wait a minute, this is interesting. And then here we are today. And it's like, if I went 5 minutes without my phone, I'd freak out.
Yeah. It's amazing how these things come out of necessity, right? So SMS was an emergency protocol. It was invented so that you could send a really small amount of data in text form to the entire network. So that's why it was only 100 160 characters. I think 160 characters, which is one of the reasons I think Twitter was 140 characters, because it was an SMS product. It was limited by SMS, which in turn was limited by the fact it was an emergency protocol. That spawned things like predictive text, because it was so hard. It was so hard to write an SMS that you had to build a T9 dictionary in the phone so that you knew what you were actually typing.
And now that, speaking of predictive text, have you seen these AI apps I see them advertised constantly, and I know you probably have too, being a fellow or former marketer, these ones that are like, it'll write content for you.
Yeah, right? I'm not sure they've got there yet, but they probably are getting better. I know that I use one sometimes to transcribe the podcast called Otter, which is pretty good. It does text to speech to text pretty well.
But have you seen these ones where you could just put in some keywords and it writes the whole article for you?
Well, Google Mail does that as well, right? So
Really?
Well, yeah.
I've never used one.
If you start typing a sentence in an email in Google now, it'll recommend what it thinks the rest of that sentence is going to be.
Man,
machine learning.
Pretty soon, we won't have to do any work.
Because like all of these machine learning things, they are the product of what goes in is what comes out. So if 200 million voices are going in, then it recognizes an American voice, but it doesn't recognize an Australian voice.
I wrote a blog maybe last year on bias in AI and machine learning. It's racist, and it's got a lot of biases, and what's based upon who writes the baseline.
But I didn't think anyone wrote the baseline. Didn't you just show it a bunch of things and say, let it work it out? But
somebody's got to train them. Somebody's got to build the model to train it, right? Okay. And there's some inherent bias in who builds the model. There's some bias in the way you code the model. And I don't think that anybody, based upon what I've learned and read, is nobody does it intentionally.
Yeah, it's unconscious bias.
It's unconscious bias, right? And so there's gender bias, there's racial bias, there's language bias, and I think that there's people think about AI or just technology in general as being unbiased, but it is biased. And they talk about it in AI and ML models. They talk about it in facial recognition models. And you have to be kind of conscious of that bias when you build things.
There was a company that got fined this week for scraping social networks and taking people's faces and selling them in a database to law enforcement.
Really? In what country?
Well, the company I think is American, but the fine was in Britain or Europe.
Not terribly shocking.
No. If you've downloaded the product that says, "Oh, here, upload 10 pictures of yourself, one a year for every year for the last 10 years, and get a future prediction of what you might look like in the next 10 years," then you are the product.
After you do that, then you feel like you've earned the right to bitch about it later. I can't believe Facebook is selling my information. Well, you gave it to them. The commerce or the trade-off of information and value of what you get for it in these different models. People just don't understand
the one that affects me the most, the one that I don't know, maybe it's because it's so real. I think it must have been in Dubai, where I was in a cafe and I wanted to connect to the free Wi-Fi for 10 minutes to check my email. And it wanted everything. It wanted my date of birth. It wanted my gender, my mum's maiden name to connect to the Wi-Fi for free for 10 minutes. I'm like, no, that is not a good deal. I refuse. I'd rather you just bill me. I'd rather you just charge me $5 for the Wi-Fi than give you all my personal information in return for free Wi-Fi.
As we move into the Web3 model, I was on I don't know if I mentioned it. I was on a radio show yesterday or Monday, and we talked about this a little bit. We talked about the idea of portable identity and access management and personalization and that idea of being able to take your kind of cookie data and having a better personalization experience with you, but then not having it weaponized against you, right? It's all of that technology exists today that you should be able, we should be able to do that, but it's just too profitable in the model of the Web 2 world of that data, your personal data is too valuable to allow you to own it and not be able to protect it. Even though with GDPR and all of these new, Apple, there are some companies that are trying to move towards ethics and protect their user data. But there's nobody's really incentivized to do that. But I think maybe as we move towards Web3 that this is becoming a thing. I think that after decades of people being the victims of having their data weaponized against them, that people are kind of opening their eyes to it,
Maybe.
You don't think so?
No, I've heard conflicting things. I've heard that the younger generations don't care that their data is used. Like I said, I don't mind giving away my data if it's going to be used properly. If they're actually going to send me relevant, personalized messaging, I don't mind if they use my data for that. And I think that if they move to some sort of anonymous model, then how do they know they're serving me something relevant?
That's a deep hole, but like what does anonymous really mean? Like how anonymous? Like they don't need to know exactly.
There's only a couple of reasons why you want to be anonymous. Most of them are because you're doing something you don't want other people to know that you're doing.
Well, I mean, they can know your traffic patterns, your browser history, or your browsing or purchase history, without knowing your name and your blood type, and like some deeper...
And like I say, for marketing purposes, I have no problem that if they know that last 10 brands that I bought and they use that to predict a brand that I might like to buy in the future, I don't have a problem with that. But if they say, well, we're going to use your transaction history to see which alcoholic drinks you've bought, or whether you smoke, or whether you exercise, or whether you do other things, and we're going to use that to increase your health insurance premiums, then I've got a big problem with that.
Right. Although I guess that would be harder to kind of manage.
But they do that all the time. They've done that all the time. Even, it happens, especially in the credit environment, right? So there's these companies that know your entire financial history and use it to build a credit score, which banks will then use to see whether or not they give you a credit card or a mortgage. From their point of view, that's a de-risking tool.
But see, here's where it gets, and this is maybe information that our listeners don't know, but you and I do know, is that this is where it gets, the line gets crossed, is that many of the companies that provide credit information or collect credit information are also in the business of selling that information, right? Yeah. And not just for credit purposes. So as a marketer, you and I know, because I've used it, Experian and Equifax, to name two. Pitney Bowes is another one. Sell data to marketing firms like us, to kind of put a pin on that, or put a bullseye on it, is, in marketing, when I worked in digital marketing, the ad agency, we used to say is marketing is creepy, but shouldn't be too creepy, but it's always creepy.
Yeah. And
so we would often, when working with major brands, buy data as what we call data overlays to enhance digital marketing efforts. So we would capture basic information from a form, as say, or a social media campaign that would be like name, address, or name, email, address, and phone number, mobile number. And then we would send that off to Experian, as an example, and they would provide us their address. And then in addition to that, based upon what the little information we give them, they could tell us what the household income was, how many,
which they're pulling from things like census data, but they're also pulling from other sources and other.
Right. Places. They could say, how many people lived in the house, what their ages were, what their level of education was, what the median household income was, what all the neighbors were, what their house, the value of their house was, what the value of the houses in their neighborhood was, if they were affluent, like what kind of cars they drove, everything.
How much debt they had.
How much debt they had. Yeah. And all of that information was available to us as a marketer. Yeah, actually, that's a good segue because I have been doing a lot of work and having a lot of conversations with banks and financial services this week. And I just ran across some really interesting stuff in doing my research because we've been working with a lot of industry or financial services industries that are banking adjacent, right? So we've talked in the past a lot about obviously about crypto and NFTs, which is kind of lends itself to not only many other things, but banking and how it can service banking and blockchain can service banking. We've talked about microbanks and neobanks. And I think I spoke a little bit in a previous podcast about how I was shocked in my conversations with leaders from larger banks, larger national banks here in the United States, about how they just don't even perceive microbanks and neobanks even as a threat.
Well, I actually saw a story today about Chase, JP Morgan's neobank in the UK is booming.
A lot of these big banks, well, I'll just name a few, like Bank of America and Wells Fargo as an example. Their primary, and not all big banks are this way, just some, their primary source of income is commercial banking and lending and contracts like mortgages, transferring contracts, buying contract instruments like mortgages. So while they are in the consumer banking business, it's not the primary focus of their business. So these technologies, while interesting to them for other reasons, so like NFTs and blockchain for conferring contracts or transferring money across international borders and expediting that as an example for using blockchain, is interesting to them. They're not super interested in the consumer side of banking because that's just not where they make the bulk of their money. There is a huge, like you said, a huge boom in neobanks and microbanks, and a lot of the big banks are perfectly happy to let banks like Chase and Capital One and Discover, as a matter of fact, has one, and even smaller ones, Chime. And Yellow Bank and a lot of these other banks, these kind of like startups almost, micro and neobanks just kind of pop up and grab that market share and provide these really low or no cost of entry consumer banking products. I'm like, how do these banks pop up so fast? So like I started doing some research on Gartner, McKinsey, and companies that provide ATM machines. They really need to be looking to the future, right? Because how much longer are we going to need ATM machines if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
So like looking for ways of like, how do we look to the future of how do we evolve your business model? So like doing that kind of research. So like thinking about ways that they can move to the future and expand their business or broaden the base of their core business. What I found was probably not very surprising to you, but interesting to me because these are things that I looked at. Some of these things were things I looked at when I worked at Aflac, things that they were interested in even 2 or 3 years ago. Things like obviously banking as a service, an idea that wasn't called banking as a service, but has been around since the 90s, which is ostensibly offering a broad set of financial services.
Sorry, what is banking if it's not a service? That's just me being
silly,
so
it's offering banking services, right? Like any kind of services that your bank would provide. Like credit cards, mobile banking, deposits, checking, savings, right? But providing it as a service, all of the digital aspects of that electronically centralized. You can open up Dave's bank, and then we're a centralized clearinghouse. We actually are the bank. We provide all of those services to you electronically, and you just white label it.
Okay. A bit like a
all of that,
like a
all of
virtual
that is
mobile network operator,
like a virtual
MVNO.
bank,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So all of those services are available to you like a la carte or as a package, and they're available for you to offer to your customers through APIs or microservices. So it reduces your total cost of ownership and the complexity, and then you could just offer that. Right. So if you're a bank that's a regional bank, to expand nationally, virtually.
To me, it sounds like they're just trying to extend the current paradigm rather than looking at the threat posed by the next paradigm.
That's correct.
If anything is true, it's that the one part of Web3 that is absolutely here and now and going to cause massive disruption is DeFi, is decentralized finance.
Right.
I do not need a bank anymore. There is absolutely no reason that I need a bank going forwards. It's an ancient construct that has no place in the future. To me, a lot of this sounds like, how do we extend our position into the future that we don't have a place in?
Some of these are actually revolutionary for financial services. It's a new way of thinking about some of these things. I think some of these things are a little bit more innovative than others.
There's a lot more global sharing of ideas now as well, because Australia used to have some really interesting banking products that never weren't available in other places of the world. So, for example, where if you got a mortgage in Australia and your salary was paid into your same account that your mortgage was attached to, you would earn interest on that money, and they would offset the interest you earned on that money against the interest you owed on your mortgage. I mean, that was a pretty interesting banking product, but it wasn't available in everywhere in the world. Some of these banks are now learning from different places around the world and saying, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting product. We can offer that as well. And we've learned from our Chinese banking colleagues and our Australian banking colleagues and our Norwegian banking colleagues. And I don't need my bank from a business banking point of view. I now have an API with my accounting software, so I'm using Xero.
Right.
But Xero, I can check my bank balance via Xero. I can do my reconciliation via Xero. I can do my invoicing and my payments and my VAT and everything else through Xero. So effectively my accounting software.
Literally don't need your bank anymore.
I don't need the bank because the bank is just an invisible thing via API on the back of my accounting software. The bank is not providing me anything really, except a depository where it sits.
It's just like a box where your invisible money lives.
Yeah, and I've got a payment gateway, which is not my bank, because my payment gateway gives me much better terms than my bank does. I've got a cross-border banking service. I use Payoneer, which basically gives me a bank account in every single country, and I can invoice in any currency that I like, and I can bring that back to my home bank. Traditional banks are becoming more and more and more irrelevant. I'm a small business, I'm a micro business entrepreneur, and therefore I can make decisions that others might take months or years to make. There are some really, really innovative solutions out there. And
sure.
So I'm surprised that you're still saying that traditional banks aren't worried about the future.
Well, traditional banks think at scale. The traditional customer for a bank like Goldman Sachs is Ecolab or Ford, or
Goldman Sachs is making its money on IPOs and mergers and acquisitions. They're not making their money on, as you say, they're not making their money on the deposits that I put into my retail account.
They're making money in the billions, in the hundreds of millions, and not at the hundreds of thousands at a time.
But even so, you would be worried if, for example, ICOs or token mints or some other non-fiat way of raising money took away your business overnight, because you can go public, or you can put together a financing deal for Elon Musk, or you can be completely bypassed because somebody like Yuga Labs decides to do a new NFT mint and raise as much money as they could have raised by going and doing an IPO on NASDAQ or whatever.
Well, and we live in a different era now than we did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where the liquidity today across the global economy is much higher.
Yeah, that's true. And but that's been true for a while. And I remember reading an article by Peter Drucker. See the kind of 80s business guru. He wrote an article in Wired sort of around the dot-com one time, and he was saying that one of the reasons that there were so many startups and so many entrepreneurs is access to finance. I mean, if 30 years ago, you and I wanted to start a business, we would have had to go to our local bank, play a couple of rounds of golf with our local bank manager, to let him know that we're all good and whatever, and ask him for a loan with an interest rate. And there would be no way we could go and raise $500,000 or $10 million to start a business. It's just access to liquidity and access to finance has changed completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there's other kind of weird and interesting things happening, embedded finance and payments. And the simplest example of this, do you have an Apple Card?
I do not have an Apple Card.
All right, so like Apple Card on your iPhone, it's where you have an Apple Card it's actually provided by Goldman Sachs, but it's embedded into your phone.
Right.
So like the roots of this are kind of in the payment industry where you have it's essentially a credit card. It feels like a credit card, but it's essentially like a loan. It's a revolving credit account, and you have it. It's embedded into your phone, and you can make digital payments with it. But they also monitor your spending habits, and it pays attention to how your shopping habits are changing, and it can expand or contract your credit availability, and it gives you all kind of really great stuff. But there's all kind of other applications beyond payments with it, Amazon has announced a collaboration with Goldman Sachs Marcus to offer loans to small businesses.
Right. I think Shopify did something similar.
And Shopify did that recently. There's a Chinese company that is providing like a flight delay insurance that is associated with an airlines.
I get that on Revolut. I've talked about Revolut in the past. I like Revolut, and it's got a whole bunch of things that I get. Three of the things I use most on my Revolut are, one is single-use cards. Just a brilliant idea. I just go into the app and I say, I want a card. It gives me a 16-digit MasterCard number with an expiry date. I stick that into the website, especially websites that do automatic subscriptions.
Yeah.
I give them a one-time card. Boom, done. It vanishes. I never get charged again. It's a brilliant service. The second one is lounges. So I can pay $20 or $30 in any airport in the world and get into a lounge, even if I'm not flying business class, which is a cool service. And the third one is what you were just talking about. I think it's flight delay insurance or something, which is just part of the package.
Which is a big deal if you travel, if anybody knows.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when they overbook the flight and you get bumped.
Which happens a lot.
Yeah.
Well, and then there's those.
We might have to come back either in this episode or another episode. There's some big problems with buy now, pay later going on right now. So, not all of these new financial products are a good thing. Thanks for listening. Join the conversation on social media. We are on LinkedIn, Twitter, and more. Subscribe to get new episodes first.
And we're back.
The thing I'm interested in is why someone like Apple hasn't become a bank themselves. I guess there's a whole bunch of regulations and compliance that would be too much of a hassle for them to do, but you'd think they'd be able to do it themselves with the amount of cash they've got.
I think it's too complicated. I don't know. My head, this is where my head has always been, is I'd rather be the middleman, provide the platform.
Yeah.
Just like iTunes, right? Be the conduit for people to do business on and just collect the fee rather than be, the actual.
Right. And I guess their technology is legacy technology now. So for them, even though it would kind of make sense for them to say, well, let's just do an Apple token and have an Apple cryptocurrency that you can earn and burn doing various things and use it for your Apple subscription, and there'd be a whole bunch of people who would love to own
and maybe
Apple crypto. But
maybe as we move into that era, maybe they will. The financial services industry is just trying to find ways to squeeze a little bit of more blood out of the turnip.
They've done it fairly badly. Like, for example, like I said, payment gateways. If you go to a bank, if you go to your bank and say, do you have a payment gateway? They give you a link to their website, which sends you to a 100-page integration document that you need a 7,000 strong IT team to implement the payment gateway. Or you can go to Stripe and copy one line of code into the bottom of your website. The success of NeoBanks is all to do with the user experience and nothing to do with the product. It's exactly the same product. It's just an infinitely better user experience than what the traditional banks have ever offered.
Right.
It's all about user experience. It's
100%. You're absolutely correct.
So there's organizations, and banks are one of these organizations, who put themselves first. And there are some organizations that put the customer first. There are not many banks of any kind who put the customer first, but some of the neobanks are certainly saying, okay, if we were to start from a blank sheet of paper, how would we build a bank so that it was really customer friendly and the customer experience was seamless and frictionless and great? And that's where they're winning. They're winning because the customer experience is 99% better than traditional banks.
Right. And speaking of that, I'm going to bring up this last one, which I think is the most interesting one and kind of lends towards what you were just saying. And I want to get your reaction to it. Transaction data monetization.
Right.
I'm just going to read it to you. It refers to the ability to extract value from transaction data to obtain insights, to improve operations, but mostly to support customer decisions and to create new revenue models.
I'm amazed there's a lot of companies, not just banks, that haven't done this better.
Right.
Now, there are marketing clouds out there, and this is one of the reasons I always said to people, this is why you need an e-commerce store. The biggest reason to get an e-commerce store is to understand your customers. Because once you have a customer who has an email address attached to them, and you know that they've looked at certain pages, they've done certain searches, they've made certain purchases, they've come back in a certain time, you have a ton of transaction data that you can then use to make decisions on. And actually, this is how Amazon wins. This is how Shopify wins. They know all of this stuff, right? The reason that Amazon decides to open a new Amazon outlet in the UAE is because they've watched people from the UAE buy from Amazon.com for 5 years and then realize, actually, it's just got to the point where it makes more sense for us to be in the UAE than for them to shop via Amazon.com. Or they know that everybody is buying a certain type of laptop case, and so they go out and source one from China, sell it under their fundamentals label or whatever they call it, their basics range, and undercut the seller that was on the platform before. Now, you think about it, Shopify is a walled garden, but every single Shopify store is on the Shopify network. And therefore, Shopify knows the transaction data of every single transaction on every single Shopify store on Shopify. That's an insane amount of interesting, useful data. I don't know how they're using it. I don't know if they're using it, but they know a lot. Even the shipping companies. I know a company based in Texas. They're a plugin for Shopify. They do a plugin for Magento. They do a plugin for BigCommerce. But they know all of the transaction data for every single site that they're on. They know where people are buying. They know where they're shipping to. They know how much the shipping is costing. They know how much is delayed. And so does Uber, and so does a whole bunch of other people, right? And so that's why supermarkets have loyalty schemes, and they monitor your transactions, how big your basket size is, and whether you bought cheese or whether you bought soda or whether you bought expensive whiskey or whatever. That's what they use for their loyalty programs. They're using transaction data. Any other corporate that knows this is your bank. So your bank knows if you're taking money out of an ATM. It knows how much cash you're spending. It knows whether you're spending money on Netflix. It knows whether you're spending money on Google. It knows whether you're buying PlayStation games. Your bank knows every single thing about you via your transactions. So yeah, it's in really, really private, but really, really interesting data.
But don't you think it's interesting? So like Gartner lists this as an up and coming thing, not a thing that's happening now, like an up and coming. Like, don't you think this is interesting that this is something that they're suggesting that they should think about? And not
I want to know the privacy issues around it. I would love to know the terms of service, and I would imagine that a bank would have to reissue their terms of service for their credit cards or their cards or their accounts in order for them to sell your transaction data. I'm fairly sure it would violate privacy regulation in almost every market. Perhaps not the US. California it would, but the rest of the US it may not. Your bank would need to be very, very clear that they were selling your transaction data to other people.
But why are they not using it for themselves?
They probably are.
I haven't seen any evidence of that, but they might be.
I know credit card companies do.
Well, sure, the credit card companies do.
Credit card companies definitely do.
But it's true. But like based upon what I've seen, my experience working with and just being a customer of banks do not provide great services or servicing to their customers that would lead me to believe that they have a great understanding of consumer behavior.
Well, they don't have a very large product set, though, do they? They could sort of maybe look and see whether you'd bought insurance in the last 6 months or the last 12 months. And if they didn't see a payment to an insurance company, then they could call you up and say, hey, well, we know that you bought insurance 12 months ago because you paid for it using our account. And that insurance is about to lapse. So do you want to buy your insurance with us instead this year? So that's a good example.
So what I mean by that is I'll use insurance as an example since I have some experience in that. So when I worked at Aflac, that's one of the things we talked about in the last couple of years in the innovation team was that's a thing that needs to be evolved. And that's why I say that they don't really understand their consumers. So as we talked about evolving how insurance should look, and really we were behind the times at insurance, is that we sell insurance and it's a box. Here's your policy and here's your benefits.
Yeah.
And the benefits are finite and rigid. Wouldn't it be nice if you could go and buy your insurance policy and like your benefits were like a slider? Like, so based upon who you are, your age, your income, and your lifestyle.
A bit like how they do travel insurance. If you want to add extreme sports onto it, you pay a little bit extra and stuff like that.
That's exactly right. That's the way your insurance should be. That's the way your banking product should be. And like that is not a stretch goal for the technology or the banking products or this is the thing is that when we first start talking about, they're like, oh, underwriting or the regulators it's going to be a problem. It's not. It's unconscious fear, uncertainty, doubt, and bias.
Yeah.
They're like, this is the way we've always done it. But if you actually sit down and talk to your people, like an insurance would be underwriting and your legal team and about your all the different regulations in different states, it doesn't matter. They don't care.
There probably are some regulatory restrictions on some of these banks. So, for example, I know that certain banks would like to offer crypto products, but they can't because the regulations prevent them from offering crypto products. So, yeah, I think that there's probably some federal legislation or state legislation which may be preventing them from innovating in some of these areas.
Right.
Transaction data, the biggest red flag for me would be privacy issues. I mean, you could do it as a black box, maybe. If you tie those two ideas together, the idea around banking as a service and transaction data information,
I think there's some distance. There's some work that could be done to really improve the banking business.
Yeah.
I'm surprised there isn't somebody that's come along that's really kind of tried to revolutionize it. You know what I mean?
Well, I guess that's what the NeoBanks are doing. They're just saying it's too hard to turn the super tanker around. So we'll start something new and more agile, and we'll do some testing on that. And
right, and
if it works in the NeoBank, it can always be acquired by a larger bank and become a new product or whatever. But it's probably much too hard to turn the supertanker of a traditional bank around.
They're iterating.
Than to start something new, afresh, and
no, I think you're right. I think they're like, hey, let's iterate. Let's start small.
And there are a lot of big traditional banks who've now got NeoBank style products, and they're aiming at the youth market, I think, and they're aiming at a digital native market as well. That's the other thing you've got to think about is accessibility. You've still got people who are not digital natives who want to walk into a bank branch and count out their cash on the counter and fill out a deposit slip and take it out in their hand. And there's still a generation of people who deal with banks in the old way. And then there's a generation of digital natives who just want to do contactless touch payments via their phones. If you don't have a smartphone, and there's a lot of people who don't have smartphones.
I know, but you know how it is once you switch. Like once I switched and I got an app and I put all my credit cards on my phone and I got it on my watch, and now I go to the gas station and I don't touch anything. I just hit the gas pump or I hit the thing at the cash register.
It is a very Western bubble. You're living in a world with unlimited electricity and unlimited data, wireless data. Right?
I know.
So, we take that for granted if we live in a city like London or Atlanta or Dubai, but you don't have to go very far until you go, oh, my battery's run out. I can't pay you because my phone isn't charged.
I'm going to be that guy I'm going to be the ugly American that goes to Europe and then complain that why don't we, all the drinks here, they don't have any ice. Why is there no ice?
Right. Or I'd love to pay you, but your Wi-Fi isn't free. So I can't pay you because I don't have access to the Wi-Fi.
Sorry.
And you have to go then you have to dig out your card and go to an ATM and pay the man with cash.
Right. How does this currency exchange work?
You might have noticed that we don't have a script for the podcast, so some things get cut, but you can still hear the outtakes on our YouTube channel. This week, how to be an online Amazon millionaire selling tap covers.
Hey, one last question before we move on, and this is a question for you. Why hasn't Shopify created a marketplace of all their stores to compete with Amazon?
They've thought about it, and I think they kind of have tried in a certain way. I wrote a blog about this several years ago because I said, if all of these stores are sitting on the same network, then it'd be quite simple to do a global search of a product across every Shopify store. And they do offer Shopify fulfillment, and it would be relatively easy to do. I think it would annoy the merchants a lot, because the biggest difference between Amazon and Shopify is that if you are selling on Amazon, you are invisible as the merchant, effectively, because you're competing for the buy box, but you're effectively just one supplier in hundreds who are supplying the same SKU. Whereas if you were to do that on Shopify, there'd be a lot of really pissed off merchants. Other thing is, and this is going to be a controversial thing for me to say, Shopify is just a glorified front end for AliExpress.
Yeah.
And if you were to turn Shopify into a marketplace, you would realize that 90% of their business doesn't exist because they're all selling the same crap, drop shipped from China.
Yeah, that is the truth.
But I can imagine there've been a lot of Shopify businesses that have gone to the wall just because of the supply chain pressures of the pandemic. So drop shipping was pretty horrible to begin with, let alone adding all the pressures of the pandemic supply chain. If you're a Shopify entrepreneur, in inverted commas, who's literally just sticking Shopify on the front of AliExpress and putting a markup on it, then you didn't really have a business to begin with. So they could do a marketplace, but they'd wipe out half of their own stores. I did see a note the other day that said that Oberlo had disappeared. And I don't know whether Shopify owned Oberlo, but Oberlo was basically the plugin that allowed you to do drop shipping from AliExpress into Shopify. Again, another one of Shopify's dirty secrets, which they probably don't want to talk about, is that they advertise globally against drop shipping as a keyword. They are behind this myth of you can be a Shopify drop shipping entrepreneur. All you have to do is buy Shopify and Oberlo and connect to AliExpress, and you can sell Chinese rubbish at a markup to unsuspecting Americans.
Oh boy, ain't that the truth? A lot of Americans don't even know about AliExpress,
which is why Oberlo and Shopify did so well.
I know.
So
I've turned a few people onto it because they're like, "What? You can buy the same thing that you get on Amazon for like 70% less on AliExpress." I'm like, "Yeah, it's just going to take 2 months to get."
But I've said the same thing about Amazon. That Amazon is a glorified front end for AliExpress.
It really is. Shocker.
There are plugins which I've used, and I was teaching marketplace e-commerce training courses around the world using this stuff. But basically, there are the API that Amazon has. There are now plugins that allow you to go to a product on Amazon. You activate the plugin, and it will show you the sales of that product across the Amazon network, how many people are selling it, what the markup is, what the relative spend on marketing is, where to source it from, so the actual link back to AliExpress, where to get it from, and then there's a machine learning piece that actually allows you to arbitrage that says, okay, if you were to do this much marketing on this product in this category, you would get to number 3 in Amazon, and you would make this much money in a month by selling this product. You last week were talking about World of Warcraft.
Yes.
And so you will know.
We were talking about the meme.
We're talking about the memes. Yeah, I went back and saw some of those memes, and I just
Leroy Jenkins.
And the dots. More dots. More aggro.
More dots. Oh, that one cracks me up.
Since the beginning of this podcast, we've been talking about relative virtues and values of NFTs. And there's been a new thing enter the lexicon of NFTs. I think it was brought up by the founder of Ethereum. But you being a World of Warcraft nut or fan, do you know what Soulbound? Do you know what Soulbound means?
Yeah.
Okay, so now people are starting to talk about Soulbound NFTs. The NFTs at the moment are worth something because they're resellable. So they're an asset that you can flip, and a lot of people have made money flipping NFTs. So they bought them at $5 and sold them for $500 and that kind of thing. So it's that collectible mentality, or that asset flipping mentality. Some people are now starting to say that the concept of soul-bound items, which apparently is a term that comes from World of Warcraft, is a potential future for NFTs. So I'm going to read from this blog by the founder of Ethereum. One feature of World of Warcraft that is second nature to its players but goes undiscussed outside of gaming circles is the concept of soul-bound items. A soul-bound item, once picked up, cannot be transferred or sold to another player. Most very powerful items in the game are soul-bound and typically require completing a complicated quest or killing a very powerful monster, usually with the help of anywhere from 4 to 39 other players, blah, 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 blah. But basically he goes on to say, what if NFTs could be soul-bound form? And I'm quoting again here. NFTs in their current form have many of the same properties as rare epic items in massively multiplayer online games. They have social signaling value. People who have them can show them off. Twitter has started rolling out integration that allows users to show off their NFTs. There's potentially problems with NFTs if they can be flipped or sold on. So, for example, we've talked about user cases like degrees or qualifications. A degree or a qualification is the type of NFT that needs to be soul-bound. So basically, once you acquire the NFT of your degree, you cannot transfer it. It is yours forever.
It's a great idea. I think it's something that they're going to have to solve for as we go forward. Like, if we're going to start using these as like a form of immutable identity and access, there's got to be some permanency to it.
Yeah. Web3 word of the week, soulbound.
Soulbound.
Sounds like a John Coltrane record.
I know, I was just thinking that.
I'll dig something out. Something by Sam and Dave, I reckon.
Right. We'd have to rate it ourselves, though, because, of course, we don't have the budget to afford the rights for that.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts?
We're sliding in here in the Americas into the Memorial Day weekend, which means big movies this weekend.
Oh, you're doing Top Gun?
Top Gun, of course. Top Gun's
Maverick.
Top Gun Maverick, which has gotten rave reviews. I'm not going to lie. I'm excited about it.
Yeah,
I am
not
a hater of Tom Cruise, as many here are. I know he's crazy.
I want to talk about next week. I had a little bit of an internet comment this week that I'm getting an inkling that the Metaverse looks like it's just a nostalgia 1990s Gen X nostalgia trip. Somebody said that Jamoroquai has entered the Metaverse.
What?
Yeah. So if Snoop Dogg wasn't enough, you've now got Jamoroquai in the Metaverse.
Well, everything old is new again. Top Gun is back. Jamoroquai is back. Tom Cruise is going to have, well, I guess Mission Impossible is not till next year.
I heard they dropped a trailer.
They dropped the trailer for that. Everything's come down. Man, all these movies, The Last Starfighter's getting a sequel from the 80s. Everything's getting a sequel.
People don't have any imagination anymore.
I know. They're like bringing these movies back like 30, 40 years later to do a sequel. What the hell's going on? But let me just say one thing in passing to you and our listeners. If you're going to see one movie this year, go see Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Okay, you've mentioned that one in the past. I haven't checked it out yet, but I will try.
I watched it again this week. It was so good I had to watch it again.
Okay.
And don't forget also this week, Stranger Things.
Yeah, it's not my bag. I did watch the Spider-Man movie on the plane back from Dubai.
Oh, how would you think? I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, Dave.
Yeah.
Come on. You are not. Where is your inner child, dude? That had I don't want to spoil it. I will anyway. All three Spider-Men from previous movies.
I can see that was an interesting twist. No, at the moment I'm just catching up with the latest episodes of Ozark. I'm not
Oh, what a great show. But have you seen the ending yet?
No, I haven't, but it's getting a bit ponderous to me.
It is.
It's getting a bit ponderous. And I think it used to be better when things had to be done on film and you had a limited amount of film to film it on and you had a limited number of time because you had ad breaks and you had to fit a schedule. I think these new streaming conditions give directors, as much as I love Jason Bateman, these writers and directors seem to just get a little bit indulgent when they've got unlimited time to.
And it can be good and bad. You're right. You're absolutely right. But there's, you just got to take the good with the bad. Just remember, isn't Taika Waititi one of your countrymen?
It sounds more Kiwi than Australian, but
he might be a Kiwi. He can take all the time he wants. He does wonderful things. Okay. But he's got to. He's doing the new Thor movie. He did the last Thor movie,
right? Which
was he's doing Love
and
Thunder.
He was in Free Guy, wasn't he?
Yes, but he's also got a show out on HBO called "Our Flag Means Death."
Okay,
and I think you should watch it. I think you'll appreciate it.
I'll put that on my list of things to watch.
Do you like Monty Python?
I do like Monty Python, yes.
Then you will probably like it.
Okay, nice. Well, on that note, I will say good evening.
Yes, I'll see you next week, my friend. Thank you.
Cheers, man. Bye.
Cheers.